Go on, say hello. Wave for the camera. What's your name? Take a close look at these children. They are just two among hundreds of kids who were reported missing by their families between 1993 and 2001. This footage you're seeing, it reveals where they were. Eventually found a sprawling 400-acre compound. It was tucked away in a remote part of rural Georgia, a place where outsiders were strictly forbidden. The video captures glimpses of massive pyramids, a towering sphinx, and other bizarre monuments. On the surface, everyone seems joyful, waving at the camera. But just beneath those smiles, these people were concealing a deeply unsettling secret. When local law enforcement first looked into the reports of missing children, they were confronted at the main gate by men carrying weapons. For decades, the truth of what was happening inside that compound remained a closely guarded secret, until doctors across Georgia began to notice a truly alarming pattern. A number of different hospitals were admitting dozens of children from the compound, some as young as 11 years old, who were expecting. It didn't take long for the FBI to get involved, and they started planning a raid on the compound, hoping to rescue the hundreds of children living behind its gates. But the agency was haunted by the memory of what happened in Waco, Texas, a raid on another compound that ended in tragedy with dozens of young children losing their lives. The event sparked widespread panic, and the FBI knew they couldn't afford a repeat. They had no real idea what they were walking into, until one 7-year-old girl managed to escape the compound just before it was too late. She was the only one who could finally reveal the truth. Our story, however, begins much earlier in 1977 in New York City. A 2-year-old girl named Nikki is living with her mother in a small apartment in Queens, New York, a neighborhood plagued by crime and violence. The streets were run by gangs, narcotics were everywhere, and the area was known for its high rates of crime and deadly encounters, particularly along Bushwick Avenue. Each day, as Nikki's mother headed out to work, she was confronted by the harsh realities of life on the streets of New York. Her thoughts would always turn to little Nikki. This wasn't the world she envisioned for her daughter, but with very little money. The single mother felt trapped with few options. Then one day, everything changed when a man approached Nikki's mother. He was dressed in a long white garment and handed her a book pointing to an address printed on its cover. That evening, filled with a sense of curiosity, she read the book from cover to cover. She finally felt as though her prayers and hopes for a better life were about to be answered. Without hesitation, she decided she would visit the address the very next day. As she walked down the street, she moved with her usual caution. But as she neared 717 Bushwick Avenue, she felt the atmosphere around her begin to shift. Then she could hear the faint, beautiful sound of a choir singing. Stepping inside, she saw children laughing, playing, and running about freely, all dressed in beautiful garments. She found herself standing before an entire community, a community of people who spoke of their shared struggles while actively lifting one another up. After that very first meeting, a new routine began for the young mother. She started attending the gatherings regularly at last, discovering a place that truly felt like home. Gradually, the streets of New York began to feel safer, thanks to the support of her new community. As the years passed, Nikki's mom began to transform. She could finally see a real future for herself and her children, a future filled with hope and endless possibilities. By now, Nikki was 7 years old, and she was becoming more and more aware of her mother's newfound faith. And so, for the very first time since her mother's discovery, she decided to tag along to one of the sermons. Nikki's mom watched her daughter closely as she walked in, and seeing her child look so carefree, surrounded by such an atmosphere of peace and joy, brought tears to her eyes. Now, behind this seemingly safe community was the one man who had made it all possible. His name was the charismatic preacher Dr. Dwight Malachi York. He had a way of walking into a room and connecting with everyone. He just knew how to bring people together. That was the core of his personality. This community, known as the Nuwaubian Nation, first took root in New York City during the 1960s. In those days, the city was a far more perilous place to live, especially for African Americans who contended with daily discrimination and violence. In the years immediately following segregation, racial tensions were at a boiling point, and the streets of New York offered little mercy. Muggings, illicit dealings, and violent crime were woven into the fabric of everyday life. So for many, the new community presented something more than just spiritual and cultural liberation. It was a sanctuary for Black residents in New York and in cities all along the East Coast. For people of African descent, there was a sense that their history and culture had been savaged by slavery, leaving a question: who are we? Into this void stepped Malachi York, proclaiming he had the answer. You are the original man, the Asiatic Black man, the maker, the owner, the creator, the father of civilization and God of the universe. York then posed a question: Why couldn't they have their own communities? Consciously planned for people of African descent. His message was clear: if you're not black, you don't belong in this room. This was often met with a shared sentiment, a feeling that it's a black thing. York, an accomplished orator, would spend decades meticulously building this community. He often spoke of fighting for black Americans, and was known to have ties to the Black Panther movement. Beyond his activism, he was also a musician, producing his own smooth jazz, funk, and disco records. He was an artist, an activist, and above all, the charismatic leader of the Nuwaubian Nation. His message of self-empowerment and strength grew even more potent into the 1980s, which is when, in 1986, Nikki's family made a life-altering decision. At just 11 years old, Nikki, along with her 2 younger siblings, moved into the community's compound in Bushwick, New York. She was promised a roof over her head, unwavering protection, and the assurance of a better, brighter future. It was an exchange, from the harsh realities of life on the streets, to a community that was said to be completely secured and protected by their own people. But this new life came with new rules, new customs, and ultimately an entirely new existence. My wardrobe changed. The way we ate changed. We began to study the Quran. We learned Arabic from native teachers. The spiritual leader took a particular interest in Nikki and her siblings, ensuring they were always well-fed, properly dressed, and kept entertained. He gave them his full attention, greeting them warmly and consistently checking on their well-being, making certain they were included in community activities. For Nikki, the attention felt comforting, special. In a way, she had found a new father figure to admire, someone who seemed both protective and immensely powerful. A little while after I joined the community, Nikki recalls my mom became one of his wives. That meant I was one of his children and I looked up to him. That's my dad, Dr. Malachi. Dwight York was the absolute center of the Nuwaubian Nation. He was revered as their leader and their savior, the sole provider of their safety and hope. By this point, membership had swelled to over 1,000 people, and their community center in Bushwick was becoming undeniably crowded. It soon became clear to York that they had outgrown the city streets. A new chapter for his people needed to begin. He envisioned a physical state with our own passports and our own tax system. I'm talking about our own nation, where no one tells us what to do but us. So Dwight York resolved to build a new home for his congregation, a sanctuary located over 900 miles away from New York, deep in the rural farmlands of Putnam County, Georgia. We're driving cross-country, Nikki remembers, and you see these rural areas that we were completely unaccustomed to seeing. We pulled onto the property and it was just vast open land. It was amazing. The property was located out in Putnam County, a deeply rural part of the state. Spanning just over 400 acres, its isolation was a key element. Their destination was Georgia, with a singular goal in mind: to establish their own sovereign nation, entirely independent of United States law. Before construction began in Georgia, York decided to completely reinvent the Nuwaubian doctrine, pulling inspiration from a diverse mix of cultures and religions, and global mythologies, all to forge a brand new identity for his burgeoning community. In his quest, he made drastic changes to his own appearance. One day, he'd adopt a Western persona complete with cowboy hats and boots. The next, he would claim to be an extraterrestrial being named Yonan, even going so far as to call himself Chief Black Thunderbird Eagle, all while sporting a traditional feathered headdress. He shifted from one identity to the next, searching until he landed on the one that would perfectly define the new Nuwaubian Nation. York then gathered his followers for a sermon, where he proclaimed their true origin. He told them they were in fact descendants of ancient Egyptians who had traveled from another planet. His loyal followers eagerly embraced this newfound identity, and immediately got to work. Construction began. A massive sphinx head was erected, looming over the once abandoned farmland. Artists were commissioned, murals were painted, and soon dozens of elaborate structures and several large pyramids started to take shape. With every new addition, the compound transformed into something increasingly bizarre and theatrical, drawing more and more attention from neighbors and passers-by. Dwight and his followers named it Tamaray, Egypt of the West. If you happened to be driving into Putnam County along Georgia Highway 142, you'd suddenly see pyramids rising from the middle of a cow pasture. It was a truly unusual sight. Have you seen their property out there? Oh, I've seen it. What do you think? I think it's kind of strange. Although the neighbors were perplexed by this strange new community, the compound itself wasn't disruptive. The grounds were kept tidy. There was no noise, and there was no trouble. It was certainly strange to look at, but it all appeared harmless. The truth, however, was not what it seemed. And what was truly happening behind those walls was far more disturbing. 2 years after joining the Nuwaubian community, Nikki was finally feeling settled in her new home. But then one day, one of York's wives found Nikki alone on the grounds and urgently called her over. She led her to a private room, and it was there that the woman told the young teenager something she could have never expected. One of the wives, she had a conversation with me and said York would be the one to teach me about the facts of life, and that he would help me and talk to me. Because, these are things you want to understand as a young woman coming of age. In a state of shock, Nikki didn't know what to do or how to feel. She just listened. Perhaps this was normal. Perhaps every other young girl in the community received the same talk from Dwight York as part of his teachings. After all, he was their respected leader, the prophet. One of the things he taught us was that the person who initiates you into womanhood, that's the person you'll always be connected to, always be loyal to. That was when the 45-year-old York entered the room and locked the door behind him, leaving the two of them completely alone. The young teenager looked up at the man she called her father. Something felt deeply wrong. Suddenly, a powerful wave of fear washed over her. In that single moment, the trust she once placed in him completely shattered. And he just said, "It's not a big deal. Why are you making this a big deal? It wasn't something I wanted." And he just held me down and took what he wanted. I was miserable. I would write him letter after letter telling him that I hated my life and that I wished I had never been born. But I was powerless to change a thing. This was the man who for my entire life had been presented as our guide, our master teacher. And when that belief is so deeply embedded in your mind, the thought of leaving is almost impossible. The world she once believed she knew, the people she was certain she could trust, suddenly felt like strangers. Everything had shifted, and there was no way to return to how things were. So Nikki remained silent, a prisoner of their doctrines and the ever-watchful eyes that monitored her every move, ensuring her loyalty. They made sure she never dishonored the leader by questioning his teachings. With absolutely no one to confide in, not even her own mother, it felt as though every door was closed. The process always begins the same way, by earning complete trust. Your own parents are the ones telling you, "This man is God, he is our savior." So naturally, the followers felt they had to do anything and everything to please him. Nikki carried on living in a constant state of fear, holding a terrible secret she couldn't share with a single soul. Around her, everyone in the community behaved as if nothing was wrong, showering praise upon Dwight York, idolizing their leader, completely unaware of the profound darkness he held within. But as Nikki grew from a child into a teenager, a quiet intuition began to whisper that she wasn't the only one. She started noticing familiar patterns in his behavior, echoes that reminded her of her own misery, from when those terrible things first started happening to her. All the while, York's influence had only expanded, unchecked and hidden from the outside world. A part of Nikki understood that escaping was necessary, not just for her own survival, but for the other children as well. Yet the fear of abandoning the only life she had ever known, and every person in it, was paralyzing. Being a victim of Dwight York's actions was one burden, but witnessing the same fate befall even younger children was something else entirely. Despite years of systematic manipulation and grooming, a part of Nikki's conscience remained intact, screaming that this was all profoundly wrong. Gradually, she came to the firm conclusion that she had to get out, not just for herself, but for every other girl who remained there in desperate need of protection. The compound was meant to be a sanctuary, a place of holiness, purity, and safety, but the reality was a shared, silent misery. Conditions on the inside continued to deteriorate, and the fear of leaving was immense. She felt she wouldn't be safe, that she knew nothing of the outside world. Still, a persistent voice inside her thought, "I have to be willing to face the unknown." Her mother, however, held a starkly different perspective. For her, the community was the very thing that had saved her and her children from the perceived dangers of the outside world. So when Nikki finally summoned the courage to reveal her intention to leave, her mother's response was completely unexpected. The side her mother chose was not her daughter's. It was then that a deliberate campaign of intimidation and psychological pressure began, orchestrated by York, but actively supported by her own mother. Despite this profound betrayal, Nikki resolved to remain strong. With no family connections in the outside world to rely on, she managed to locate a former member of the group who was now living in Atlanta and offered her a safe place to stay once she escaped. In the compound, York was enraged to learn that one of his so-called daughters was attempting to leave him. For him, the sense of betrayal was immense, and his pride was at stake. Nikki's open rejection had backed him into a corner. In response, York made an unprecedented decision, in a calculated move to save face. The new narrative was that Nikki wasn't leaving him. Rather, he was the one casting her out. On the day of her departure, she was terrified and numb, feeling as though this was the end. But she thought, If this is how it ends, at least I will have made this one decision. This one choice for myself, because for so long she'd had no choices at all. She had always done what she was told. Now her new mission was crystal clear. She had to expose the horrifying truth of York's organization and rescue the children who were still imprisoned on that compound before it was too late for them too. But what she couldn't have known was that a larger force was already at work. For years, the Federal Bureau of Investigation had been quietly constructing a case against the leader, prompted by a series of deeply disturbing phone calls coming in from all across the nation. Calls from desperate parents, who all shared one tragic thing in common: a missing child. Calls would come in often from a frantic mother or father voicing the same fear. "My daughter is in that group, and I can't reach her." They would ask, "I don't know what's happened, can you please find out?" But any attempt to approach the property was met by an armed guard at the main gate. Access to the compound was strictly forbidden, and at that early stage, the full picture of what was happening inside remained a mystery. Soon after, medical professionals in the vicinity began to raise alarms as they started to notice a deeply disturbing trend. Young women, some merely 11 years of age, were arriving at local hospitals in a delicate condition, and their point of origin was consistently traced back to one place. They all came from the compound. As federal agents deepened their investigation into York, concerns mounted over the potential for a violent outcome. The risk to innocent lives was palpable. Should the FBI need to directly confront the group's leader? Intelligence gathered over time indicated the presence of a significant cache of weapons. This information fueled fears of a potential firefight. Concurrently, York's behavior grew more erratic and aggressive. He posted armed sentinels at the entrance, and the residents of Putnam County grew increasingly wary of the strange activities next door. Tensions continued to escalate, with locals reporting sightings of members openly marching with firearms on the property. This presented a complex problem, dealing with an armed group that openly declared itself exempt from the laws of the land. In such situations, armed conflict can erupt without warning. The question for law enforcement was tactical. How do you safely apprehend the leader and dismantle such a closed-off organization? It was evident that something was deeply wrong within the compound, but without cooperative witnesses from the inside, investigators were stymied. This left the authorities in a precarious position, as both federal and state agencies were determined to avoid a repeat of the Waco tragedy. The shadow of 1993 in Waco, Texas loomed large, recalling the disastrous fire that consumed the Branch Davidian compound. This event occurred just 1 year before the investigation into Dwight York began. It was the culmination of a 51-day standoff between the FBI and the religious sect. That siege ended in a catastrophic fire, claiming 76 lives, among them 25 children. An operation that started as an attempt to serve warrants escalated into one of the most sobering and tragic events in modern American history. The aftermath triggered a firestorm of public and media criticism, with many questioning the government's tactics and handling of the crisis. Haunted by this precedent, authorities proceeded with extreme caution in their investigation of York, a process that would span nearly a decade. Over those years, they meticulously built a case against him, but one crucial element was consistently missing. They needed a credible statement from an insider, someone who could testify to the truth. That breakthrough came with Nikki, a young woman who had recently fled the compound. She made the decision to speak out, stating that he had exploited their labor, their minds, and their very beings, keeping them under his spell. She was determined that he would not have the final word. With this powerful survivor testimony on the record, authorities at last had the evidence they needed to act. On the morning of May 8, 2002, Sheriff Sills assembled a force of over 200 officers, including deputies, U.S. Marshals, and FBI tactical agents. Their objective was to take Dwight York into custody. The primary challenge was to prevent him from inciting his followers to armed resistance during the operation. A misstep could lead to a deadly confrontation, a risk compounded by the known presence of many children. To mitigate this, Sheriff Sills devised a specific strategy. The plan's first step involved discreetly tracking Dwight York, waiting for the moment he traveled outside the compound's fortified walls. The FBI had already established surveillance. This was a coordinated effort with teams on the ground and air support overhead. For hours, law enforcement waited in tense silence, anticipating the next move. At last, the gates of the property known as Tamaray swung open. A sleek black car emerged, and FBI agents immediately began to tail it, trying to remain completely unseen. Radio chatter confirmed his vehicle had just entered the parking lot of a local grocery store. Both the SWAT and arrest teams were in position. Our primary task was to get a positive identification on him. Concealed throughout the lot, FBI agents held their breath, eyes fixed on the car, waiting for a door to open. They were counting on Dwight York being inside that vehicle. A single mistake could jeopardize the whole operation. If it wasn't York, they couldn't risk tipping him off that they were closing in while he was still safe inside the compound. And then a rear door swung open. A man stepped out. The surveillance team got the confirmation they needed. It was Dwight York emerging from the car. That was the signal. The agents moved in exactly as they had rehearsed. With precise coordination, they deployed from their unmarked vehicles, closing in on York, who suddenly found himself engulfed by a swarm of armed agents. He had nowhere left to run. The team made the arrest. With York secured, it was Sheriff Sills's turn to execute his part of the plan. He swiftly led a convoy of dozens of local and federal officers straight through the gates of Tamaray, though they proceeded with extreme caution. Hundreds of children and their families were living on the property. Despite expecting resistance, they made a non-forcible entry through the main gates. As deputies moved onto the grounds, a wide perimeter was established. The raid was a significant show of force, involving hundreds of officers from local and federal agencies. After years of fear and secrecy, the era of Tamaray was finally coming to a peaceful conclusion. The operation was a success, executed without a single act of violence. I recall thinking to myself, we are going to make this case. We're going to bring some form of closure to so many victims. With York in custody and the Nuwaubian compound effectively dismantled, Putnam County law enforcement, alongside the FBI, began the arduous task of building their legal case against him. For the next 2 years, they meticulously gathered witness statements, expert testimony, and mountains of evidence. It became clear that York absolutely dreaded the prospect of a trial where all of his secrets would be laid bare. In early January of 2004, the trial of Dwight York commenced. He was facing a battery of charges, including numerous counts of child endangerment, racketeering, conspiracy, and tax fraud. As York sat in the courtroom at long last, facing the consequences of his actions, the survivors were there too, sitting together, holding hands in solidarity. Among them was Nikki. She looked at York and saw not the self-proclaimed god and prophet she once knew, but simply an old man, his hair graying, his frame looking frail and diminished in an orange prison jumpsuit. It had been 3 years since I'd last seen him, and it felt liberating. I realized he couldn't command me anymore. He couldn't make me do a single thing. That moment was the beginning of me taking my power back. Nikki stood tall, nervous but resolute, and filled with a newfound strength. She walked to the witness stand, ready to testify against the man who once held absolute power over her life. The testimony of one witness led investigators to another, creating a chain that ultimately helped identify more victims. In total, they interviewed at least 40 individuals. After 3 weeks of testimony on January 23, 2004, Dwight York was found guilty on 11 of the 13 counts. He was subsequently sentenced to the maximum penalty allowed. Among the vast array of state and federal charges he faced, York ultimately pleaded guilty to 74 counts involving the mistreatment of children and the illegal transport of minors across state lines for illicit purposes. In addition to conspiracy and racketeering, Dwight York is now serving a 135-year federal prison sentence, confined to his cell for 23 hours a day. With every legal appeal exhausted, this is where his story ends. For his victims, a measure of justice had finally been delivered. The sentence was more than a punishment. It was a promise that they could finally hold their heads high and chase the dreams that were once stolen. Following York's conviction, Nikki found her new beginning in South Florida, embracing a new chapter. There, she not only earned her GED, but discovered her true calling as an artist, driven by a profound mission to uplift her community and empower others. In 2015, this mission took form as an organization she founded called What's Your Elephant?, a platform that uses the power of art to question and challenge societal norms. For the past 2 decades, Nikki has been a force for positive change in her community. While Dwight York merely claimed the title of leader, Nikki truly embodied it. He had us all fooled, she reflects. He never cared about any of us. He exploited our labor, our bodies, and our minds. Now confined to a prison cell, he experiences the very life he forced upon us. But he doesn't get to write the final chapter. And it is this very strength, the will to stand up for herself and so many others, that has not gone unnoticed. In 2004, for her courageous testimony against York, she was honored with the Louis E. Peters Memorial Service Award, recognized as the highest civilian humanitarian award in the United States. Fueled by a determination to transform her pain into purpose, Nikki continues her vital work with underserved communities, helping them find their own voices to speak their truth and share their stories. She stands today as a testament to true leadership, living proof that even from the darkest of chapters, a profound sense of healing and purpose can ultimately emerge.